You're listening to the Cash Flow Academy podcast with Andy Tanner, your source for investing made easy. Here's Andy Tanner.
Welcome to the Cash Flow Academy podcast. This is where investing is made simple. I'm Andy Tanner, your host. Today, we'll be having a discussion, very important one, with Matthew Hennessey, and he is the author of Visible Hand, A Wealth of Notions on the Miracle of the Market. And this book is going to be a great foundation or a great premise in which to have a good discussion, because I could tell immediately that Matthew Hennessey has a love for simplicity as I do. Information without education has no meaning. And sometimes, a college professor type will almost make it more complex to be intellectual, where if we can reduce things down to stuff that's really simple and understandable, then we have usefulness, and the education actually becomes more valuable when we can apply it and use it. So with that, we welcome Matthew Hennessey. Thanks for being on the program.
No, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
This is going to be a lot of fun. I usually begin by having our guests take the opportunity, just give a little introduction of yourself, give the narrative and the story of what brought you to make the decision to author this book and why you felt it was an important one for people to read.
Well, this is my second book. My first book I wrote in 2018. It was about Generation X technology and the different generations, which is an evergreen topic. By day, I work on the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal. I've been there since 2017. Before that, I used to work for a magazine called City Journal, which is a quarterly glossy magazine published by an outfit called the Manhattan Institute in New York City. Has to do with policy and culture and the world that we live in. I'm a father of 5, and I live in Yonkers, New York, which is just north of the Bronx here in lower Westchester County. So, as I just mentioned, I have 5 children. Like most parents, I have got a desire to help them understand the world, help pass along some of what I've learned about it. Since I, write for a living, it's always at the forefront of my mind that I might, be able to turn some of my daydreams into publishable copy. Words is money in my business. So, I started jotting some of my thoughts down, initially with the idea that I would leave something here for my children, just leave something around the house for them to read, that would build on some of the, road trip lectures and living room orations that I've given them in the past, that would help them to understand a little bit about how the economic world works. I'm no economist. I am not credentialed by the Academy to discuss a lot of this stuff. I haven't actually worked very extensively in the private markets, having worked for nonprofits and magazines and sort of money-losing ventures for most of my life. But I wanted to give them this basis of market economics, because it took me a long time in my own life to come by it, and I hope that they don't have to wait until they're 30 plus years old to start, understanding, what a price is, how it's set, and why it matters. So, that's the short, long, medium version of who I am and why I wrote the book.
Well, it's an important book, and I share your position. I'm a father of 2, and we spend an inordinate amount of time, playing things like Monopoly. We did lemonade stands when we were kids. And now that my kids are teenagers, we have introduced them into things that are more elaborate. My oldest son, he trades a little bit of options and covered calls. It's fun to do that, because I think it's important. Everyone, we all dissected a frog in high school. Poor Kermit, we had to cut up a frog. And I think if you're going to be a zoologist or a herpetologist or a surgeon, it's great to practice on the frog first. But everyone will deal with money. Everyone will. And to prepare our young people for a world that was much different than our grandparents, our parents, or us, in terms of debt, in terms of and the constant expansion of borrowing. Very, very important stuff. The Federal Reserve has had major policy changes since 2007. And so we do have a lot of interesting things to talk about today. Let's start with this. There's a word called financializing. Did I say that right? Financializing our economy and convoluting economics. Why do you think this is so complex?
Well, part of the reason that people hold, or a certain type of person holds economics at arm's length, shall we say, is because it can be intimidating. Mm-hmm. It has a for the same reason that people are scared of math or certain
right.
Geometry or certain sort of it feels like homework to an awful lot of people. There are different types of people, as you know, in the world. Some people have aptitudes in particular directions. I was the type of person who much preferred reading words on a page to looking at, charts and graphs or equations, any of that kind of stuff. So I was oriented not towards the things of, having to do with numbers. And I think a lot of people think that economics is, as you said, it's about numbers and it's about highfalutin concepts that I don't understand. And when they come on the news, I kind of, I get up to go get a drink of water, or I go to sleep for a little while when I hear them talking about what you were just talking about, futures markets and interest rates and crypto and, whatever, the producer price index, inflation. Some people just go to sleep when they hear that stuff. And it's fine. I'm actually very much hardwired to be that kind of a person.
Well, you're a step ahead of me. You're a step ahead of me if you like charts and graphs and visuals. I'm the type of guy that says, "Hey, let's go wrestle." Let's go.
I'm the other guy.
So for me, this is this type of stuff is a godsend. And how I wound up as an educational financial education was probably the same thing. As I just thought, well, can't anyone make this simple? So that's good stuff. Another term that I like to discuss is this one: over-credentializing. So the financializing is making things complex. What's over-credentializing?
Well, the idea of credentializing, it's sort of, it's a way of limiting the number of people who can come into a conversation, right? So if you don't have a particular degree, or if you don't have a particular set of letters after the end of your name, then you're not really welcome to discuss it. I'm a journalist. I'm not an academic, and I'm actually not even that involved in financial markets beyond what you would expect from a normal everyday guy living on a normal everyday street. So yeah, if credentialism is if we have to compare credentials even to have a conversation about the market, then I'll always be on the outside, and I think that there are a lot of people who feel that way. So my book is a kind of a book for those people rather than a book for the kind of people who spend all day plugged into a Bloomberg terminal or with 3 screens and 3 different channels giving them market news and information all day.
Well, and I'm not even so sure that those who we view as credentialized, I think another part of that that's interesting is if I were to take someone, and I don't like disparaging people on the podcast, that's not polite. Let's look at Janet Yellen, very academically credentialized, but as look at all the Fed chairs, for example, from Greenspan to Bernanke to Yellen to Powell to whoever might get. I often wonder how much hands-on investing and hands-on managing they've done. We have a lot of academic credentials, but I often wonder if we say, well, since they're Fed chairs, they must know what's going on. I don't envy their position. I look at Jerome Powell and the COVID he'd have to deal with, and the amount of money we've borrowed and printed is just, it makes your book timely, I think, because it takes your breath away. And now, the reason I like a book like Visible Hand is we've got inflation. We have an aftermath where now people at the gas pump and people at the grocery store and people look at their 401k and people look at investing. Now we have some real issues to deal with in terms of inflation, in terms of debt, in terms of philosophy about MMT, that it really is time for, or timely, I should say, for people to learn about this. So could you speak just about the general state of economy right now? What do you see as you and I will say, well, non-credentialized maybe compared to those, but we can still talk about it. It's okay for us to do, yes?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I wouldn't have written the book otherwise. You mentioned MMT. That's a perfect example of an idea that is so stupid, you'd have to be an expert to support it. So many people hear these kinds of conversations or, see how complicated the economy can be and completely shut down to the point where they actually start to believe that it's all a house of cards, that it's all made up. You encounter this kind of this viewpoint among certain teenagers and people whose minds are elsewhere much of the time, that money's not real. So cryptocurrency, in other words, can be a perfectly fine asset, the kind of thing that you might borrow, take some money off your credit card to buy, because none of it's real, man. It's all just going to go away one day, and I call this the strawberry fields philosophy, which is that nothing is real. So the people that I'm trying to reach with my book are the kind of people who would be so frustrated by the complexity of the economy that they choose to ignore it, or that they choose to pretend it doesn't affect them, or that they can't do anything about it or within it, and so are susceptible to certain manias or bad philosophies. So, in my own house, I'm worried about people getting seduced by certainly, a mania like, crypto, but also, socialism. So my book is kind of like the kryptonite for that, in the sense that it lays out what's going on in a market economy, why it's real, why it's not fake, and why it to some degree controls and governs how we live, and that the best approach is to sort of understand it and to work within it, rather than trying to fight it or trying to believe that you can replace it with some pie in the sky nonsense like modern monetary theory or, heaven forfend, socialism.
Now, I'm a capitalist, so I will make that declaration and confession. But when I've written in my hunt and peck, brutally unskilled style of hunt and peck typing, when I've written about it, I don't see a problem of capitalism versus socialism. I see more problems of morality and problems of laziness or greed or wanting something for nothing. And I'll tell you, the chapter in your book that I actually skipped to it because I looked at the table of contents, and I went to this one first because you gave a 4-letter word. I'd like you to elaborate. I don't want to give too much of your book away, but I don't want to be a spoiler. But I would love you to articulate just this little part on a chapter 7 called work. And I love this idea because right now, particularly with Generation Xers, they, we're having really major changes in how we feel about things socially. Social issues are huge. Social, and it makes a lot of sense. And there's a little story you tell where someone says, okay, we've got a Major League Baseball player that basically hits a ball, and that's his skill. And then you got a school teacher. Now, if you look at utility and nobility, I think you go with the school teacher. It's a noble profession. My father was a school teacher. I think of the thousands of kids that spend an hour a day with him for a full year. He has a chance to impact their lives, but yet someone gets paid a huge amount of money to hit a baseball. Well, that's wrong. And you quote Thomas Stoll a little bit about wages and salaries and the how they serve purposes. Talk to me if I'm a young person and I say, yeah, this is just wrong. There should be a law that says baseball players should never make more money than a school teacher because they don't serve society as much, and it's just ludicrous that we have million dollar athletes where teachers are not paid as much. Could you address that and kind of talk about what you said, because I thought it was pretty interesting.
Well, the first thing that an economist would say is a baseball player or a professional baseball player in the major leagues makes more money than a school teacher because he creates more value. Now, how does he do that? Is it value that you or I think he deserves? Maybe, maybe not, but it's measurable. We can at least measure it in terms of the amount of revenue that his team brings in, and how well he does and how well he's compensated is sort of like, there's a basis upon which to measure that. A teacher may add a great deal of value in a society, and certainly may add a great deal of value to a student, but that student is in no position to compensate the teacher for the value. Certainly not now, probably not anytime in the near future. And society doesn't have a really great way of measuring that specific value, the amount of value that accrues to that student from that teacher. Some teachers add no value. We don't have a way of measuring that either, except we can observe it. The point of the story is less to compare, one salary to another, than to illustrate the main point of the book, which is that there are a lot of things that we might want. There are a lot of worlds that we might prefer to live in, but simply preferring them or simply wanting them doesn't make them so. A lot of people show up and spend a lot of good money to go see the Yankees play, the Mets in the Subway Series or something like that.
Yep.
Not too many people show up on the first day of school with a big bag of money to hand over to the principal to give out to the teacher. So there's a kind of a reality about, where the money is that helps explain why the baseball player makes more than the teacher. But the ultimate lesson is that, life is not about what we want. Life is about choices that we make. And if we choose to go into a profession that is perhaps, more noble, like teaching, it's not like we can say that we weren't warned that there might not be a whole lot of money in it. It's simply, worrying a coin or pulling our hair out saying, why don't we live in a world where teachers make what ball players make, is, I don't know. It's kind of a dumb question, because the answer is both obvious and impossible to articulate. It is just what it is. The world is what it is. This is part of the problem that, sort of motivated my desire to write this book, which is that a lot of people think that the laws of economics are arbitrary or invented, that Adam Smith came along, wrote this big book, and invented a bunch of things like supply and demand and imposed them on the world, and that we have to live under these rules and we can change them anytime we want, try on a new system like we try on a new suit of clothes. The reality is that the laws of economics are more like the laws of gravity. They're just objective reality. They are what they are, and you have to, you can study them and you can quantify them, but you can't upend them. You can't repeal them. You can't really even fight them unless you have, a rocket ship or an airplane. You can maybe defeat the laws of gravity, but, people haven't invented a rocket ship or an airplane for the laws of supply and demand. They bind our choices, and they constrain how we behave commercially, but also personally and interpersonally, and we have to accept them. We can change things here and there, and we can pay teachers more, but we must understand that there will always be a trade-off. That paying teachers more might mean choices that society doesn't really want to make. Obviously, society doesn't want to make those choices, or else they would have made them already, because we live in a pretty responsive political system. So, that's what I want to say about ball players and teachers.
I love the insight of. In fact, it was funny because the metaphor of gravity is what came to mind when you spoke of it. That if you're going to be Adam Smith and write The Wealth of Nations, is this an invention or an observation? It's definitely an observation. And that's a great segue maybe into chapter. There's a chapter 9 called The Anti-Marketeers. And the chapter starts, the world is full of liars, falsifers, fibbers, and fanaticists. And there is a lot of fantasy. And what's interesting is the reason, there's really a collective reason for us to educate, because an electorate is going to be subject to rhetoric of one idea or another. And the less educated a person is, the more they'll likely be swayed by emotions and fantasies and how we feel about a certain rhetoric as opposed to the realities. And, I have to be careful. You have to tread so lightly. I don't envy your position as a writer, because words have become very inflammatory. I grew up in a very different time. Perhaps we've progressed in a very positive way out of it in a lot of ways. But also there's a lack of resilience in terms of speech. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. That was kind of the rule. It's like, look, if someone punches you, that's a bully. But if someone says something, they're an idiot, and you've got to take it as such. This guy's an idiot. Don't let him hurt you. Much, much different day. So the idea that we can't have any pain is a real interesting one. In 2008, Wall Street had some tremendous leverage going on and some very high-risk investments. Words like collateralized debt obligation and mortgage-backed security were not words in the normal vernacular in 2006 and 2007. And the government said, you know what? There's going to be too much pain. Our grandparents went through a depression. We don't want to have this same thing happen to us, and so let's change our rules and let's print more money. And as I look at the Federal Reserve balance sheet at that time, which was $700 billion, so it takes from 1913 to a little less than 100 years to get to $700 billion greenbacks out there, currency. Now we're closing in on $9 trillion. Absolutely astounding changes to the Federal Reserve balance sheet. And to me, I feel like we're saying, look, we don't want to have any pain. And capitalism and life, is there a certain amount of resiliency, and if you become too aggressive, you have to pay the piper sooner or later. And maybe we're choosing to pay later. What's your thought on that?
Well, at its very root, economics posits that you can't have everything you want. Life is about trade-offs. So what you were just describing there is a sort of a policy stance that ignores that reality, that suggests that, we can have everything we want. We can use the levers of policy to keep people from experiencing the downside risk of life in a free market economy. And, there may be some really valid reasons for that from time to time. There may be some places in the economy where you can sort of insulate people from being wiped out or from causing, a nuclear level event. But there's always going to be a trade-off. There's always going to be a cost. And like squeezing that balloon, you can get the bottom, but it squirts up to the top. And when you grab the top, it squirts down to the bottom. The financial economy is a lot like that. When you start, I use the analogy in my book having to do with inflation about, trying to control a car on an icy highway. If you overcompensate, if you turn the wheel a little too much while you're going 75 miles an hour on an icy highway, you're going to start to skid to one direction, and you're going to want to compensate for that by turning in the other direction. And the next thing you know, you're just spinning like a top, right? So some of what you're describing it gives one the sense of people who really think they know how to drive that car, but have left you spinning like a top, and everyone's sort of left to go, well, gosh, I'm glad somebody's driving, but I'm not really sure which way is up and which way is down anymore. Yeah, listen, the gist of my book is that you can't get something for nothing, which is a simple idea, but it's really important, especially for people who are approaching economics from the point of view of extreme skepticism, or who have been poisoned with bad philosophies. You got to start with the basics, and the absolute basic is, every choice comes with a trade-off. Economics is the science of choice, and if you don't understand how you make choices, whether they're choices about what flavor of ice cream to have or what monetary policy you're going to pursue, if you don't understand that there's trade-offs involved, there's going to be a lot of pain indeed for everybody.
This is fantastic stuff. An understanding of the reality, I think, helps us weigh political rhetoric. For example, let's look at a big business fan and someone who wants to support big business and can say, well, you know what, this is too big to fail, and so we're going to have to bail out these guys. We're going to change our rules from just buying bonds, so we're going to buy mortgage-backed securities because the amount of people that would be hurt would be too great. Okay, that's not a capitalist idea. That's a socialist idea. On the other side of the spectrum, we might say, well, no one should ever have to, everyone's entitled to a home, education, healthcare. We can go through all these things. No one should ever have to pay for an education, or no one should ever have to pay for healthcare, or no one should, and we should be all equal in a certain sense. So these sides of these ideas that are based on what would be nice in the world, no one should ever have to watch their child die. No one should ever have to lose their parents, at a young age or even an old age. Our inability to deal with adversity and just say there should be a law, it's quite a trend in my opinion. I'm only in my 50s, so I'm not a sage yet, but when I get up in the morning, my knees feel like they're a sage. But it's a fascinating book. So how do we approach the idea that the middle class is kind of dissolving? I feel like it is. Is that a misperception of mine? There is a wealth gap. There's no question that there is. Or is it? Is that rhetoric or is it real? How do you deal with that?
It's not really a topic in my book that I would address there. My sense of it is, being, just about the same age as you, that ever since I can remember, I've been hearing people say that the middle class is disappearing in this country, that the middle class is being squeezed, and that 40 or 50 years ago you could raise a family of four on a factory worker's salary with no college education, and that the world was better then than it is now. I'm not entirely sure that I buy it after hearing it for 30 or 40 years. There's the economy has changed. We've become a service economy. We're no longer a manufacturing economy primarily. So, the requirements of a service economy have changed as well. And so people who consider themselves middle class will tend to be much better educated than the middle class, was in 1952 or 1962. I've seen a lot of numbers that suggest that, your dollar certainly buys less today than it did then. It even buys less today than it did 2 years ago. This is, the people who are constantly crowing about the middle class is disappearing seem to have, that's a good issue, because it scares people into thinking that their quality of life is, and the quality of life, the standard of living that their children will enjoy, is inevitably going to be less than that which they enjoyed and that which their parents and grandparents enjoyed. What it ignores is that we're constantly improving ourselves, that people, these groupings, the middle class, the upper class, the working class, or whatever, are not static categories. People move between them in the course of their own lives. In the course of generations in the life of a family, you will see lots of different movements in terms of income, but in terms of educational attainments and all these kinds of various things. We live in a dynamic society and a dynamic economy. These things don't just stay static over time. So when people say the middle class is disappearing, I say, okay, sure, but I have a better car than my parents ever dreamed of. My home is greener than anything they could have. We have more consumption possibilities than they could have ever dreamed of. Our purchasing power may not be quite the same, but there's been a lot of technological improvements that have made life better. So to simply just to bang the drum, the middle class is getting squeezed, and inequality is growing, and wages are stagnating. That seems like a perpetual gripe that leaves aside much of the reality about being a early 21st century American, and how much better it is than being an early 20th century American.
Well, I appreciate the answer because I think about my sons. I bought them some iPads when they were pretty much old enough to point on one. And it was really nice because they realized that Google was a much better place to get questions answered than their dad. The internet knew more than Dad did. But it opened up a world, gave them a gateway to the world and, maybe even to a degree the universe. And they did so much better with those types of devices. And I think, if Steve Jobs, how much work is it to build 650 million of those, to invent it and try to make 600 million of anything, let alone something like that, and distribute it to the world. Well, a person's going to be compensated pretty well for that. And they say, well, that's not fair. No one should be that rich. But I think he gave more than he took, in my opinion.
Let me just, I hate to interrupt you, Andy, but this is an important thing. Steve Jobs is such an interesting character, and the device you're talking about is the technology you're talking about is such an interesting illustration of my main point, which is that the iPad and internet technology has given us so much in terms of making our lives better. But it's not been without trade-offs. There's always a trade-off. This is my hobby horse, right? And we're all familiar what those trade-offs are. I don't have to tell you or your audience how life has changed as a result of having these amazing devices in our pockets all the time. We're different people than we used to be. We behave differently. A lot of our behaviors are ones that we're not proud of and that we don't like and that we wish we could undo. But none of us has given back the iPad or the iPhone or any of this technology anytime soon. That's not going to happen.
Yep.
So, what technological advancement really neatly illustrates is this concept that's at the heart of my book, which is at the heart of economics, which is that life is about trade-offs. You can have a device in your pocket that's more powerful than the rocket that took the Apollo astronauts to the moon in 1969. The trade-off is you're going to be hating yourself all day long because you're a slave or an addict to it. Now, someone might get in my face and say, well, that's the problem with capitalism, is that it just keeps giving you shiny things and it doesn't care about your mental health. To which I say, sure, that's fine. That's an argument we can have as long as we begin by understanding that we gained something really incredibly valuable in exchange for the things that we have to give up. We were allowed to make these decisions in a dynamic, free economy. In a sclerotic, unfree economy where all of the decisions are not made by Steve Jobs, but by central planners or pointy-headed apparatchiks, you often not only don't see the technological advancements, but you also get the downside. You get all the downside and none of the upside in those economies. So I'll take the American, good old-fashioned USA with its with its chorus of people saying that the middle class is getting squeezed, and its chorus of, nationalist populists saying that, the fabric of society is being eroded, and its chorus of crazy leftist progressive socialists saying that it's all a big ripoff and we have to, redistribute everything if we're going to have equality. I'll take all that. I'll take that crazy quilt. So long as I'm protected by good old-fashioned American freedoms, and we can all sort of yell at each other. I'd much rather live in that society than in the one where we all have to fall in line and no one's allowed to have an opinion.
You mentioned that as a writer, you make your livings, words or income, the ability to articulate things. We live in an information age, which means we also live in a misinformation age. You talk about greed and ambition, and how some people will convolute those words or make them synonymous when they're not. And I'm a huge fan of ambition, and I encourage my kids to be ambitious and to make the most of themselves. And I've told them capitalism is simply this: how many people can you serve? And you'll always have to give more than you take. And what I meant by that is, in order to get $1, someone's going to feel that they're gaining more than what they're losing. And that's true. You're going to have to give someone more than you take. It's not possible to get rich without serving a lot of people and giving out more than you took, because people simply won't make the trade if they don't think it's worth it. So this is a wonderful thing. Let me finish up this. I'm going to throw some real hard ones at you because I want to learn how to answer these when they're thrown at me. because I really do believe in capitalism, and I believe in free markets, and I believe in ambition, and I believe that the early bird gets the worm. I believe in the story of the little red hen that I learned as a kid. I believe that hard work still does pay off. And I think the internet and the technology levels the playing field more than ever before. Some people say, well, there's just no opportunity. The big guys crush the little guy. I disagree. I think there's more opportunity because you can talk to everyone in the world if you have a good idea. You know, the viral nature of it. If you have good ideas and you have good stuff, people are going to hear about it, no question. So here we go. We said the MMT is a ridiculous idea, printing money. Okay, watch this. Let's balance this against pain and misery and destruction. In World War II, our debt to GDP ratio was the highest ever. We haven't even gotten to that. I think it was about 250. And that means that we went in a ton of debt to fight the Nazis in Japan, right? We spent a ton of money. We borrowed a lot of money, and the debt to GDP soared. And, you know, out of that World War II, it created this huge, it capped off an industrial revolution, and we were better off for it. Okay, great. We had Sputnik go across the sky, and President Kennedy says, hey, we cannot afford, we got to get to the moon first, because if we invest heavily in NASA and we plant our flag on the moon first, you know, the technology and the things that we'll gain out of that, you know, will help us maintain, you know, as a world power. Okay, now we come to today, and let me throw some stuff my friend Richard Duncan has thrown at me, and they're interesting questions. We should print $10 trillion right now. We should print another $10 trillion. I'll tell you why. There's a race for AI that's more important than the space race. If China gets to AI first, they rule the world. We should invest to get to AI. We also have $165 trillion in promises we've made for entitlements. If we invest $10 trillion, we'll cure cancer and cure diabetes, and that'll relieve us of that 165 trillion in Medicare and Social Security stuff we'll have. We can't afford not to print money with the collateral of the U.S. economy as it is. Our GDP is high. We can handle these debts without inflation. Besides, just like World War II, we have to invest because we got to win the space race to AI, and we've got to save the environment. We have global warming, and so we've got to print unlimited amounts of money. We have to give people free education so we can develop the technologies to beat well. So on and on and on and on and on. That is the I don't want to call it rhetoric, but that is the line. You know, that's the lines of communication on. Yeah, we have to print more money because we have no choice. What would you say to that? I don't know, maybe that's a softball for you, but I think that's an interesting devil's advocate question.
Well, I think anybody who's listened to this long into this podcast would throw their device across the room if I didn't point out that everything that you just listed, all of the wonderful things that you just listed, left out the trade-offs. Sure, we could have $10 trillion and cure cancer. Maybe, I don't know. Is that what's holding back the cure for cancer? Money? I'm not convinced that that's true. Maybe someone can show me that it is, but there's a lot of money sloshing around, and the cure for cancer sure would be a lucrative thing to have on your resume. So I'm not sure that I buy it. Would spending all that money ensure that we beat China in the race for AI? Maybe. I'm not sure that it would. I know that it would come with a lot of trade-offs. I know that we would debase our currency to the ground and make what we're experiencing right now seem like a child's party in terms of inflation. So yeah. Anyone is free to come up with a laundry list of good things that they could pay for if they only had $10 trillion. But people who leave out the likelihood of downside risk and trade-offs are simply, they're ordering off a menu that doesn't exist. They're saying, I want one of everything. And when the bill comes, whatever, we'll just print some money. It'll be fine. Come on, man. We're all sophisticated enough to know that that's a load of hooey.
This is fantastic discussion. Matthew Hennessey, you've been so gracious with your time. The book is on Amazon.com. It's called The Visible Hand, A Wealth of Notions on the Miracle of the Market. It's a very simple book. It's a common sense book. I think it resonates with a person's common sense spirit. I'll warn you that it exalts things like work. It exalts, things like ambition. And I think those are wonderful exaltations. And I think it's so timely culturally, but also, with the economics that we face with inflation and the monetary policies and fiscal policies, particularly in my home country, the United States. So thank you for writing the book. Thank you for sharing it with us. One of the ways I promote books, I use a metaphor all the time that, Matthew has spent a lot of time writing in the Wall Street Journal. He spent a lot of time on this book. If you had the chance to take him to dinner and bend his ear, as I have for an hour or so, would you pick up the tab? You probably would. Well, you can get much more than that for much less than that by simply going to Amazon.com and picking up a copy of The Visible Hand. The more ideas you can get and reflect on, I think the better foundation you can build your own investments and create your own cash flow. Matthew, any final words for the listeners before we close?
No, does any of your listeners want to take me out to dinner? I'm a cheap date.
Well, New York, they've got some great places there. My wife is from a small town with about 250 people in it. When we go to Manhattan, she's in heaven. She absolutely loves it. It's like taking her to the moon. So when we're out your way, we'll look you up and we'll pick up the tab, your choice, wherever we want to go. That's all the great stuff.
All right, I'll be here.
Hey, Matthew Hennessey, thank you again. The book again is Visible Hand, A Wealth of Notions on the Miracle of the Market. Wonderful simplicity, common sense reading on markets for those that are non-credentialized. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
You've been listening to the Cash Flow Academy podcast with Andy Tanner. For more information on investing made easy, go to thecashflowacademy.com.